start with this. I don't think most people know that Socrates met Plato in the gymnasia,
Mm.
right? So the origin of Western philosophy starts in movement practices, right? Socrates was a stonemason, and Plato was a wrestler. He was a pretty decorated wrestler. Plato was in his name. I think his name was Aristocles, but he earned the nickname Plato, which means broad, because of the breadth of his shoulders when he was wrestling. So we have this image of philosophers, these kind of kneebish intellectuals, you know, and that's not how it began. And so I think that there is something inherent to like deeply devoting yourself to a movement practice that opens a doorway to a more philosophical outlook on life. And I think that I've just happened to be gifted in that area in the way that I can articulate those connections. It's something I've been interested in from the beginning, right? I remember in 2006 being on parkour.net forums and everyone talking about this idea of parkour philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Like parkour, parkour wasn't just jumping off of things. It was this philosophy. And that was what was really motivating and important to a lot of the early adopters of parkour. But my sense was that parkour was, as a philosophy, was relatively incoherent. I think there's something that emerges out of the practice. The practice embodies a philosophy, but the founders of parkour were mostly not highly educated people, right? They're deeply educated in the body, but taking it to that ability to really articulate exactly what they were experiencing and what it meant wasn't an easy thing, and especially for us who are English speakers, right? Because most of the people who started it were they're monolingual in French, right? So they could explain things in a way that worked for other French-speaking audiences, but when it was translated in English, I think a lot was lost in translation because and into Russian and Spanish and every other non-French language too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was something lost in translation there about what the philosophy was, and they were young, right? Like the guys who started parkour, like when we all, like in 2005 when I began parkour, like David was in his early 30s, right? These guys, they were figuring it out, right? It wasn't like they'd been building this idea for 40 years and then we're like, this is the really deeply conceptualized articulated version of it. They were like, hey, we can do some really cool stuff and it's connected to this idea that we have, and let's make a video. And then people are like, wow, the video, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the 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 fame of parkour outpaced the cultivation of its actual philosophy, and I think we're still in some sense playing catch up. Does that make sense?